the liberal ruling class, is creating two enemies, one internal enemy, the AfD, the populists, and one external enemy, which is Russia, which are sort of the creation of enemies. And because there's the AfD and because there's Putin, we, the liberal sort of ruling class, we need to shrink the space of democracy because it's threatened by the AfD and it's threatened by Putin, and we only defend the democracy, yeah, which is in a way the complete perversion of what it is, yeah, because with the argument that there is external threat and internal threat, AfD and Putin, they are basically cracking, I mean, just cracking down democracy, yeah, with the argument to defend it.
Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to Professor Ulrike Guérot, one of Germany's most famous and most outspoken political scientists. We've talked before, among other things, about her political persecution at home in Germany, but today we want to focus on her new book called Zeiten Wenden, or in English, Changing Times, Schematics about the intellectual situation of the present, in which she explores and says goodbye to reason, democracy, and Europe as we used to know it. Ulrike, welcome back.
Hi, Pascal. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back online, and thanks for writing that fantastic book. And maybe just let me ask you, after the 200 pages you wrote, I mean, can the Federal Republic of Germany still be saved?
Well, probably not in an existing way. I mean, there's something really profoundly changing in Germany. I mean, there is something like a very shrinking space in public opinion making. Yeah, for a start, I think many people have noticed. But then there is warmongering. I mean, there is obvious sort of activity that Germany intends to go to that war against Russia. So we are now entering a time in which also the citizen rights space is shrinking in Germany. And this is things I had never expected. You know, I think I'm a very good citizen. I mean, just to say this, but there were times I would, be with the president on a state visit in France. You know, I mean, I have feelings of a functioning federal republic in which we did Europe, we did peace, we did Franco-German relations. I mean, where I had the feeling that my country is sort of functioning and okay and embedded in a law sort of frame. And I do no longer have this feeling. That is a problem, yeah? So democracy is cracking, but also the legal sort of fabrics of the Federal Republic is cracking. To give you two examples, we have two citizens, German citizens living in Moscow, Alena Lipp and Thomas Röper. Both are doing journalistic work, on international relations. And both have been writing about the Russian-Ukrainian war. They have also been visiting the war territories. I mean, they did very good investigative journalism. And these two people have been put on the EU sanction list. So they have been basically withdrawn a citizen's right. The thing is that they can no longer travel to Germany, so they are refused entry to the Federal Republic. All this happened without any law decision, without any judge seeing this. So this is clearly against international law. It's clearly against German law. And in infringement of such a manner, you feel like, what is happening in my country? Because obviously, in the, say, critical community in Germany, many people are now wondering, sort of, will I be the next? And that's obviously the goal, sort of, that now people are wondering, will I be the next who is withdrawn citizen rights?
I reported on this like yesterday on the channel or a few days ago by the time this video here goes online, and it was these two German citizens. This is the first time to my knowledge that these Russia sanctions are used against EU citizens and for journalism, because Alina Lipp, the case, her profession, it even says war correspondent, and this is coming from the EU. This is coming from Kaja Kallas, who included these people on this list, and the 27 member states just nodded off on it. To me, this is only a trial balloon. I mean, if this goes through, this is a new tool in the toolbox, and it is scary because it has nothing to do with a court or the rule of law. This is an executive decision. Why can this stand in your view?
Mm. I mean, let's just first focus on Alina, but I mean, she just has a Russian father. And when the war started off, she's a young girl, never being so much into politics. Yeah. And then the war comes, and you are in a German Russian family. Your father is Russian, and you want to understand what more than humanitarian reflex that there's something that is disturbing your family, which is a war, but your family is a German Russian family. Yeah. And so this girl, I mean, this young woman now, is because then she, moved to Russia, wanted to understand, interviewed people, started a blog, out of own sort of curiosity, which is a very good reflex, I think, for a human being. Yeah, I'm thrown into a situation a little bit like Sartre. You are thrown into something you want to understand. And now she's on the EU sanction list. You need to understand this. I just wanted to scale the humanitarian human situation with what is happening in a legal sense. Yeah. So yes, you are right. I think this is stating examples for a huge critical community in Germany. I also think like we can't let this go. And for instance, I was yesterday in Aix-la-Chapelle, Aachen, where the Karls Prize has been given to Ursula von der Leyen, and there was obviously counter demonstration, and Patrick became the prize, and I had the laudatio. So there was the whole critical community uh, stating precisely this. We were all saying that this should not let go. We can't allow this, because then there will be next persons. Now it's the two, but if we let this go, the third, the fourth, the fifth person will come. Yeah, and that's precisely what I wanted to do in my book, to say, look, I mean, there is a thing where I wish that international community, which is used to see a federal republic that for years, in my opinion, was quite well functioning, that had its fabrics of law. We were good functioning democracy, doing Franco-German relation, doing Europe, searching for peace with Russia, building the Charta of Paris, building a bridge to Russia after the 89 sort of events, and so on and so forth. But something in the past, say, decade or 15 years, I don't know, in the banking crisis and then Maidan and the follow-up events, was literally cracking the neck of the Federal Republic. And now this country is downturning, and not only socially and economically, which everybody can sense, I mean, there's inflation, there's social unrest, but Germany is in a weird sort of situation, which is that citizens are more or less silenced. Citizens, I think, have a feeling that something is going on. You talk to people, most people understand that things are no longer as they were, but there is something like a silencing. Everybody's a little bit cautious. People have understood you better don't say what you really think, on Ukraine, on Israel, on Corona, all these things. And now it starts that they have this legal sort of tracking of the critical voices. Yeah. I think you can say that the critical voices are now basically cut off the German opinion corridors. And that's obviously a sensitive moment, because if you lose the critical voices, and if there's lawfare, that's what you were describing, yeah, that there's lawfare on an EU level, which is just even not a judge decision, but just EU law. And EU law goes straight into Germany, and then German citizens are getting rid of their rights. That's not acceptable. Yeah.
It's even worse, because it's not even law. It's not. This
Yeah.
is not a decision, to have a regulation by the Commission and so on. This is an executive decision. This is really not far. I mean, sorry to say that, but this is the same what Adolf Hitler did, of declaring what is legal and what's not, with executive power of that branch.
Yeah. And that's and in say political or historical terms, it's very weird to see, because I think the global community is adopted to a federal republic that tried after 48 or 49 to basically reinvent itself. Yeah, Federal Republic. We did a lot of historical work to search for the origins of Holocaust. We have a good civic education program. I mean, we always wanted to best the best pupils in a way. Yeah, the best pupils for Europe, the best in Franco-German relations. I mean, there was something like Willy Brandt democracy, even Helmut Kohl doing Europe, we are the best, yeah, sort of the best pupil of Europe. And the best law and order sort of thing, yeah, because there was always a little bit, say, arrogance of the Germans down to the Greeks or the Italians, because we are the smartest in the economy and so. And I think the whole world, the global community, was accustomed to this Germany. And my message to this community, which you, Pascal, are basically playing to, is that this Germany is finished. This is my book. This Germany is finished. And I can understand that now in the global community, there will be a sort of process to get accustomed to a changing Germany, which is in betrayal of its past, in betrayal of its own narration. We are European, we are a law sort of country. We don't do sort of taking away civil rights. You wouldn't expect this from the Federal Republic, right? So there will be this process that the world looks differently at Germany and understands that Germany, also if we talk the wars, I mean, this sort of Ukrainian-Russian war and the Israel-Gaza thing, that we still do weapons delivery. We are in infringement with our own laws. There is obviously German legislation that should not do weapons delivery to Israel, giving that what is happening, I mean, the cruel things that are happening in Gaza. But if you look at the Ukraine-Russian war, you see that Mr. Merz 2 days ago talked about Reichweitenverlängerung towards Russia. So this,
Longing the range, missile range, yeah.
The range of the missiles. So hiddenly, basically, he said the Taurus is probably flying, and we allow to fly it to target goals in Moscow. Yeah. So there is some sort of, interpretation now what that really means. But if it means that Germany would attack, I mean, indirectly, obviously, because then German soldiers are in the missiles sort of, doing the technology and driving it. We need to understand that the 2+4 treaties, the 2+4 treaties of 89 or 90, which are basically the sovereign basis of the Federal Republic, would fall apart because it states that there's no aggression going from German territory to Russia, and Russia is signatory country of the 2+4 treaty. So this is really, really serious.
It's very good that you're bringing that up, because there's another thing that is being done in breach of the 2+4, which is that Mr. Pistorius, your Minister of Defense, recently said that he's aiming for a German army of 460,000 troops. The 2+4 treaties have a cap of 370,000. It just seems that all of this is now falling apart. And that's besides the fact that the 2+4 also state that there will not be production or possession of nuclear weapons. And of course, right now, there are at least 20 nuclear warheads in Germany under the NATO sharing agreement. I mean, this whole post-Cold War the 1990s and the agreements, especially of the early 90s, they're all falling apart in front of our eyes. And they're going away, and they probably won't return.
And that is basically, that's why you said my book is about the end of reason, the end of democracy, the end of Europe, and Germany as a pillar country of the European architecture. And the thing is that it happens right now, and it happens in front of our eyes. I mean, this distortion of the laws. We saw law infringement since decades. I mean, there was over Minsk agreements. I mean, the whole sort of run up to this Ukrainian-Russian war was a history of law infringement, if you want so. Minsk agreement and NATO-Russia Council, everything by the West was basically cancelled, and so on and so forth. So it's not the first time that we see law infringement in the Federal Republic, but we see it now with such a density, and we see it sort of in the German level and on the international level. On the German level, for instance, I mean, that's what everybody's talking about, that we have what we call the Verfassungsschutz, so the agency that is controlling the constitution, basically, say.
Constitutional protection force.
But this agency is no longer controlling or saving the constitution, but controlling citizens. So what we did in this, because there were legal changes, and what is now happening in Germany, that there is no more difference between criticizing the government and criticizing the state. So if you criticize the government, which is your best right in a democracy, you say, look, X and Y and Z, you would need to change, then you can be told that you are criticizing the state. and then enemies of the state must be prosecuted. Yeah. So the moment you melt down criticizing government and criticizing the state to one simple fact, then what do you want to do? I mean, this is really how they shut down critical voices, and you can only be deeply concerned. And again, this is a message to the global community. The Federal Republic of today is not the Federal Republic you used to know. Yeah.
The scary thing is, or like one of the fascinating things is that the part of Germany from where you hear most popular criticism about this, not just in intellectual circles, but also on the streets where you had demonstrations against this, is the East. It's the GDR. Those are the people, especially during Corona, who said, we've seen this before. We had it before, that we were told on TV that the world is ending and we go out and things are fine,
Yeah.
but we were not allowed to believe our own lying eyes. And
Yeah.
we've had the talking heads. We recognize this. This is the return of everything we wanted to get rid of, and it's now coming in full force. So in a sense, it seems to be a late victory of the GDR spirit over the FDR, isn't it?
In a way, yes. The thing is that I was traveling a lot. I mean, the country, for those who don't know, but the country is totally split also in voting sort of schemes between East and West. Yeah, if you look at electoral maps, the Federal Republic is totally split. You can see the former GDR as if it were a border on electoral maps. Yeah. So most of them, by the way, vote. It's blue, so AfD, sort of populist vote, whereas the Federal Republic is sort of black. I mean, Merz, Germany, and the CDU. And that is obviously because the, say, former socialist protests skipped into populist protests. Yeah, the PDS, the party that was in the East very strong after 89, basically shifted into populist vote. Yeah. But you are totally right to say that the former GDR citizens, they have such like a feeling for what is happening, because that is precisely what they say that we had before. And you hear jokes in former GDR. There are even some pollings say, can we build again the anti-fascist sort of wall again?
Yeah, we have the wall back, please. We don't like them anymore in the West.
Because that we want the anti-fascist wall again, because this sort of western part of Germany is turning into something we do not want to see. And on the European scale, it's the same. If you look at Orban, if you look at Fico in Slovakia, I mean, you see that the former countries that have been already accustomed to something like shrinking public space, they are now much more alerted to this infringement of law that comes through the EU. I mean, the EU, that is the problem. The EU that was built once upon a time as a sort of peace project and should have turned into a democratic Europe with the Maastricht Treaty, with the constitution we tried in 2003. But this body of the European Union is clearly getting para-authoritarian structures. Yeah, we have the European Digital Service Act. What we see is that there is NATOization of the EU. People are striving for congruency between NATO membership and EU membership. You see this with Finland, with Sweden that had to enter NATO through the effect of this war. So we see militarization of the EU. We see digitalization and control features coming from the EU. We see shrinking space, Digital Service Act organized by the EU, and we see, look at Romania and all these election sort of interferences, that you have clear what we call lawfare. I talk about lawfare in my book, which is if you can't beat people with political sort of means, which is election, then there are some weird sort of happenings and the candidates are removed, and is all, interference of the EU. So the problem is that the European Union that 20 years ago was there saying, look, we are Copenhagen criteria, we are rule of law, we are the European Union, sort of the ever best pupil in the global scale, that this European Union, as much as the Federal Republic, are truly turning sour and are in infringement of their own legislative body and sort of the whole fabrics of law. And that is a tragedy. It's a tragedy.
Somehow Europe always catches up with itself. And whenever somebody tries to unify the continent, it always goes wrong. I mean, especially when they do integration and not just a network. But let's your book. I would like to discuss the three concepts that you talk about in your three core chapters. And maybe let's start with reason, because you're saying we need to say goodbye to reason. On what kind of levels is reason leaving from the EU, like beyond now just the state structure that we're seeing?
Well, the first chapter about reason is not really linked to the political sort of processes, but it tries to sketch out the underlying societal changes. Yeah. And the underlying societal changes are a couple. I mean, there are a couple of changes. There is digitalization, there are control features, there's bureaucracy, there is a clear generational gap, which I detect, yeah, between the sort of over 60 who still have memories of the Federal Republic that fought for peace and for democratic Europe and so on and so forth, with a younger generation which is sucked into the internet, which has no more reading capacity. I have many pages about the lack of science, what science is, that science is scientism today, you know, that the reason is missing in what we declare to be science, that it's all about mathematics, that this mathematics don't help us with the real sort of things. Yeah, it's all about supercomputers, and we don't even know what we do with all these simulations, so that we started in science to only trust figures. Yeah, I mean, just numbers.
Figures.
Yeah, figures and numbers. And so there's something that we lose because you cannot put everything in numbers. Yeah. And so you see it with Corona, you see it also with the climate discussion. It's all about numbers, it's all about models. So we try to model the world. And the sort of cognitive thing here I want to describe is, what does it help us that we do a model out of the world? I mean, can this help us with real existing problems? So there is an epistemic sort of moment here in which I argue we are losing reason. Is it reasonable to do that science that we decreed to be science of today? Yeah. So this is a huge sort of societal chapter that I place in front of the book.
Yeah, and it's very important because it goes hand in hand with what we have seen over the last 7-8 years, which is this tendency to argue that scientists, or the right scientists, they know the answer. It's singular, the science, and the answer that you need to follow, and the experts who will tell you. And if you question that, it's like questioning questioning your government. You question reason itself, and you yourself are a problem. And Germany has this very interesting phenomenon of Querdenker. I don't think this happened anywhere else. It's like, you know, the group of people who rejected these corona policies, they called themselves at the beginning, lateral thinkers, which used to be a good term, and it was immediately turned against them, and is now an insult. Somebody who doesn't believe in reason, somebody who doesn't believe in the science. And this, of course, plays straight into believing the authorities. And I think that's where you go into in the next chapter, in democracy, right? That democracy itself is turning into something from above and not from below.
I mean, one of the interesting things is to compare how the impact of Corona was in societal terms, Germany and the rest of Europe, because the Latin countries like, say, Spain, Italy, Greece or so, obviously had more, say, societal resilience to not fall into proto-fascism, because it was nothing else than proto-fascism. Yeah, that Germany, that always was the best sort of disciple of fascism. We had the Holocaust, we did this, never again, all that civic education. But what happened in Germany and happened much less in the other countries was Denunziantentum, denouncing people. Yeah. And there is obviously a sort of, I don't know, characteristics in German society that if we do something very right, you know, very perfect. Yeah. And so this Denunziantentum, sort of denouncing other people, was very, very obvious in the Corona years. And as you say, who wouldn't believe in the science, in these figures, in these data, was out. Yeah. And that's what I call the loss of reason, because science is about curiosity. Science is about putting into question. Science is about falsification. So what I try to describe is that this whole digitalization, mathematics, and so is pushing us into a new form of epistemic rupture. It's really a civilizatory rupture that we can no longer accept that the figures might not be it. Yeah, the figures might not be it. And that a model can't explain the world, and that we need other things to explain the world. And so if we lose the sort of classical science, which is falsification, figures are not it, and so on and so forth, what we lose is our recognition to understand the world. So in that respect, I really argue that the loss of reason is the societal condition to lose democracy, because democracy, that's your question, democracy needs citizens that are sort of smart and awakened and sovereign, people who want to engage, people who want to think, critical citizens who say, what are you telling me? That's not good. I have my rights. I fight for my rights. That's what you need in a democracy. Yeah. So if you have citizens who are basically first only looking at their cell phone and what the cell phone tells them, who are no longer in any way able to have haptic experiences, yeah, touch things, see things, because they always have plugs in the ears or metaverse, whatever, glasses, and they are no longer in their senses. Yeah, I have a huge chapter about why you need your senses to understand the world and not only figures. And so obviously you lose democracy if you have citizens who are no longer sensual, because you need your senses to understand the world. So you have citizens who can no longer fight for their rights, because then you have the conformist pressure, which in Germany is very sensitive. Yeah. Oh, you don't better say this. You don't better say that. I got a lot of emails, people saying, Madame Guérot, I, appreciate you are saying these and these things. You speak out of my heart. You speak out of my soul. I can't do this here. I'm in a school. I'm in a ministry. I'm in a whatever company. And if I say what you say, there's a conformist pressure. So you do not want to live in a society with conformist pressure, because that's the opposite of democracy. In a democracy, everybody goes in a room and say, look, we look at Israel. What do you see? How should we react to it? If you then have the feeling, oh, I better don't say what I think, what I see in Gaza, because I know that somebody could say she thinks that and she has worded it in that way, and that might be an infringement, and so on and so forth. You end up in a para-totalitarian structure, yeah, because you're silencing people. And if you silence people, that's the end of democracy, and that's what I wanted to describe in my book.
And that's what you did brilliantly in the book. And when it comes to this democracy issue, one more thing that I observe at the moment is the tendency of the elite class to equate democracy with themselves. We've had this recently again with Mr. Keir Starmer, who had a car of his and two of his houses like vandalized, right, by some young dudes. I don't know what the backstory there is, but I mean, it was vandalized, and he immediately said this is an attack on democracy. No, it was an attack on you, because I just wait until somebody says la démocratie c'est moi. We are on the way to that.
Yeah.
Can you explain this to yourself?
Look, I mean, I try to do some, it's a book that I want to be largely out, so I try to do not too much theory, but to write an easy, accessible book, yeah. By the way, I'm a little bit proud. It has been sold 6,000 times in a week, so that's a pretty good result, yeah, and I hope to have some translations. But in essence, what you describe is this, let's call it the ruling class, that gets ever more oligarchic, yeah, in all countries, like Starmer, like look in the US, there is a clear what they call, what Bruno Amable, there's a French political scientist, Bruno Amable, what he calls le bloc bourgeois, the bourgeois bloc, yeah? And the bourgeois bloc is basically petrifying itself against the people, yeah? And the bloc bourgeois calls itself, we are the democracy, we need to defend it, we need to do all this lawfare against those who allegedly torpedo democracy, yeah? And that's the Starmer thing you described. I'm the Democrat, and because I defend democracy, now I'm aggressed, so the aggression of my house is an aggression on democracy, which is totally weird, because what probably the aggression meant is that you are betraying the interests of the people, Mr. Starmer, and so I'm protesting against your house, yeah? You can inverse the argument. So what I do in my book is I try to describe a cleavage between liberal and populist, yeah, that is what I call the civic warfare. And because we can no longer organize this in elections, because most of the sort of Western societies are trying to keep the populist parties out. FPÖ, Marine Le Pen, Trump, Republicans, AfD, and so. And there is lawfare, not warfare, but lawfare organized against the populists, because the populists are told to be not democratic. They are told to aggress the sort of legal order. And that's why the ruling class, I mean, the what they call the Mitte, the center parties, which are in themselves totally extremized and totally radicalized, because they now use all this warfare to keep the populists out. So what I do is I argue in my book with, Giorgio Agamben is a very prominent Italian philosopher, and he has written a book in 2016 that's called Stasis. And stasis in ancient Greek means Stockung, so a society that is no longer fluid. Yeah,
it coagulates, it freezes.
It coalesces, yeah, and coalesces in sort of two poles, and one is now the liberals and one is the populists, and the liberals pretend to be the morally superior sort of people, ruling class, the this classical center government, and they in a extremized way do now lawfare against the populists. They try to push out candidates like in Romania, or look at Marine Le Pen, who is no longer has the right to go for the French presidential elections. Look at what they did with Donald Trump. He had a couple of lawsuits. They wanted to go behind him legally so that he cannot do the elections. And then there were also 2 shootings, So the AfD, there's now idea to forbid the AfD in the German legal system. Kickl in Austria won the elections but couldn't become chancellor. So what I describe in my book, that there is basically a liberal ruling class, which is what you call in Germany kein guter Spielverderber. Basically they're losing the game. They feel that they're losing the game. They feel that they are losing public support, which is the essence of a democracy, that you have a government that is carried by public support, and they realize altogether that they are losing this, but instead of blaming themselves, they blame the populists, and then the populists are so-called right-wing, and then they need to be forbidden. And this is a very, very insane process.
Yeah, and it must be said, I mean, I judge you and myself, I count us to the left side of the political spectrum. But we obviously must point out that right now, our colleagues on the conservative right are being demonized and systematically shoved out. And the thing that connects us is that actually both camps currently are rather anti-war, at least when it comes to the war in Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. I have a question, though, that has been lingering on my mind for a while. The term populism, is that still a concept that we should deploy? Because it seems to me the longer I think about it, that populism is just the word that liberals use for Democrats or democratic minded people who they disagree with in order to rationalize them away. So democracy is only what the people who agree with them think about. Or am I going too far? Does the word populism still serve an analytical purpose today, or does it still serve an analytical purpose to you?
Look, thank you for the question, but indeed I have a long chapter about this. Yeah, what is populus? What is also in ancient Greek? If you start with Plato, Aristotle, the populus, and the answer is everybody's the populus. Yeah, because if you are not populus, then you have a king. I mean, only those who are not populus, then you are in feudal structures. Somebody's the king, and the others are the people. Yeah. But the people is about republicanism, which is we the people who form a political entity called republic, res publica, that organizes the common good. Yeah. So what I do, I mean, also in terms of semantics, if you go back, say, to the 19th century, populist, let's just remember, because you said you are more left-wing and I'm also more left-wing, I mean, 10 years ago, during the banking crisis, I was called the most lefty European because I was in favor, I was against the austerity policy. Yeah, now I'm a right-winger. So it's totally weird. But let's stay a moment here. What happened to the political system, that's Bruno Amable and the Bloc Bourgeois, is that the right-wing, left-wing scheme that has been organizing our political systems has been turned into up and down. And that's the Bloc Bourgeois ruling against the people, and that happens in the whole West. In the United States, it's an oligarchic sort of cemented, ruling class against the people now, and no longer left wing. It shifted. So, and then if you go back to the 19th century, populist was a positive terms. It was the Socialist International that cared for the people, that would bring alphabetism to the women, that would give the sewing courses to the women so that they could sew and, make some living income for the 6 kids they had to nourish, So you go back, Barbès, Jean Jaurès, the old sort of Sozialistische Internationale, we can see that was populism, In French, you hear it because the French have a distinction in their wording between citoyen and bourgeois. So you have the citizen and the bourgeois. So the citizen is sort of the Republican that cares for the public good. And then you have École populaire, la valse populaire, so popular
school, popular
in the French. Whereas in Germany, where citizen is only translated Bürger, so bourgeois, there is a different, the connotation, But what is happening, and there's lots of literature. For those who read German, I quote largely in my book Philipp Mano, who has been really doing a very good book arguing that basically since the ideas of British parliamentarism, John Locke and the whole thing, political representation, so representative parliamentarism, was a method to keep the people out. And the sort of theory behind is that the people, we always talk about the people is the sovereign, but the people is only an abstract notion. The citizens vote. The people is abstract, And Mano describes that the moment we are in is a moment in time where the people gets real. We are in the streets. We want different things. We do not want the war. We don't want inflation. So the people, through the populists, gets real. The people is stepping out of the abstract sort of thing, and it's getting real and protests against the ruling class. So in a way, you can say this is stasis. I described this sort of correlation, of the society. It's also a pre-form of civic war. Let's not fool around, If you have a people oligarchy confrontation or bloc bourgeois and the people, and you have a ruling class keeping out the people that ever gets louder, in theory terms, in theoretical terms, this is a pre-form of civil war, And then you look, for instance, we are going back to what is happening in the Federal Republic. I mean, the laws that, for instance, the army might be used in situations of exception in their own country, for instance, has already been changed. For years, there was a consensus that never ever the army is used inside, But then is Corona, and then is we are in law, we are perhaps in warfare with Russia, whatever. So you create emergency law situations, and because of emergency law situations, that is what I do in my book. I try to link this sort of external threat, which they say is Russia, to the means of oppression inside. Because there's the war and because Putin is so evil, we need to do this and that lawfare in Germany because we need to be prepared, So there is obviously a correlation between the shrinking space of democracy in Germany and the enemies. So what I argue is that the liberal sort of let's call it the liberal ruling class, is creating 2 enemies, one internal enemy, the AfD, the populist, and one external enemy, which is Russia, which are sort of the creation of enemies. And because there's the AfD and because there's Putin, we, the liberal sort of ruling class, we need to shrink the space of democracy because it's threatened by the AfD and it's threatened by Putin, and we only defend the democracy, which is in a way the complete perversion of what is, because with the argument that there is external threat and internal threat, AfD and Putin, they are basically cracking down democracy, with the argument to defend it. So there's a complete perversion of the argument, and it's an extremized sort of center that I think is totally fearful to lose ground, because they're losing ground. Yeah, look at the elections. Look at Merz. I mean, look at Merz, who wasn't even elected in the first round, although he had a majority of 18 votes, and although he had a fiscal package, 800 billions of money. So you should say, okay, everybody's voting Merz now because he did so many election promises. But no, he wasn't elected in the first round. And then they did, I mean, just to say this, they did the second vote on the same day, which was also in infringement of German constitutional law, or of the Tagesordnung of the Bundestag. Normally, if the chancellor is not elected in the first round, you should have waited 2 weeks to have a second round. Yeah. And so the moment it happened, 1 hour later, they reorganized, the Tagesordnung and the Satzung of the Bundestag and found some little leaks, and then they changed it. And then, so you have the feeling in Germany that the law is existent only as long as you need it. And the moment you need it, you push it away. And as a German citizen, it doesn't feel good. Yeah.
Yep. But that's the mindset of these people. That's the mindset of Ursula von der Leyen when she says we've got tools. Because the law is a tool, and the good thing about the toolbox is that you only take out the tools you need. The ones you don't need, you leave them away. And in a sense, this is how these elites are now starting to play the instrument of the toolbox against these very pesky people on the ground who don't want to follow, and in their view need to be educated, right? They need to be taught what the problem is, because they understood it, right? And they need to be taught how dangerous Russia is and how dangerous misinformation is. And
then
they probably believe it, these people. They believed them so.
Yeah, but the problem is, how the loss of reason impacts on the loss of democracy, my second chapter, and the loss of democracy makes any geostrategic thinking about Europe senseless.
Right.
If the European countries, meaning like France or Germany or Italy and so on and so forth, are all cracking their democracies and are in infringement with what we used to have as a legal order. And if on top of it you have a supranational structure called the EU, which should have been reformed into a democracy since long, but basically is now turning into a para-authoritarian structure, then my real question, and that's your, neutrality studies, because your YouTube channel is about rethinking the world in terms of neutrality and what is the multipolar order, and which place Europe could get into that, in that multipolar order. But then the assessment is loss of reason means loss of democracy, means loss of Europe, means no more place for Europe in the world. And that is, a very difficult sort of assessment. It's the third chapter of my book. But I mean, Europe obviously is tiny. It's 500 million people. Look at China. Everybody has understood that Europe is no longer the center of the world. Yeah, I mean,
except for the Europeans.
Except for the Europeans, yeah, and the Europeans accept me because I have understood it. I mean, there are a couple of Europeans who have understood it.
Yeah, there are, but
so,
yeah.
So there are minority voices in Europe. They are, and that's important. That's important that on this channel, Neutrality Studies, because you are looked at in South Africa, Brazil. Many people are following you. Yeah, and I think it's a very important message that there are Europeans who have understood that this, European arrogance, rule-based order. We are the West. We are defending freedom, liberty, and so on, which is the EU sort of von der Leyen talk. That this is basically bullshit. Yeah. So there is a critical mass of Europeans in Italy, in France, in Germany, and so on and so forth, which is building up, and which is also, that's interesting, connecting across Europe to say, look, we want a different Europe, and that different Europe needs to emerge somewhere. And it's very important that we send this message to Japan, to South Africa, to Brazil. Even, I was in some American talk shows to say this, yeah, to reach out and say, look, don't look at Europe as the EU that goes into war against Russia. That is not the EU that most European citizens want and see. There is critical mass, yeah. But obviously, because we as critical mass, we are in a way oppressed, yeah. Our voices are not loud yet and they are not heard. But I hope that it is something that can be fermenting, because the real question is, what is the European space in a multipolar world? And is there any? Yeah.
No, absolutely right. The question on my mind is, at which point are we in this development? And now, thank you, by the way, for phrasing this earlier the way you did, because it now explains to me why the Europeans, the European elites, reacted so viscerally, not just to the peace offensive by Donald Trump towards the Russians, but also the criticism of the Americans against the cronian state that the European Union is getting into. And because Vice President Vance, of course, criticized the Europeans for freedom of speech and so on. So the Americans attacked the Europeans on both levels, where they try to create these enemies. But my question is, at which point are we? And if we use the Titanic, I think we haven't hit the iceberg yet. So I think we are not sinking yet. But if you think we already did and we're sinking, and then what does our minority do? Do we still try to fix the ship, or should we try to organize the rescue boats? At which point are we?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question. I would argue we hit the iceberg, and since long. I mean, for me, in my book, I do a clear line since the banking crisis, yeah, and Warren Buffett, this is a war of capital against labor, and I take the banking crisis as the starting point where the left has been given up. Because the left by then tried to organize against austerity, Varoufakis, Tsipras, and so. And the left was basically then killed or liquidated, if you want so. I mean, it went nowhere. And then you had that woke left and, without any teeth. And the left turned into the right. I mean, this shift from, Hufeisen, this shift from left resistance to this globalization oligarchic structure to a right-wing people's-based sort of resistance against the bloc bourgeois. For me, it's the banking crisis, and the banking crisis was the iceberg. Yeah. And if you look back, because we were trying also to compare proto-fascist sort of tendencies in our country, just remember that in 1929, we also had a banking crisis first. Yeah. We also had a banking crisis first. And then we tried to do social polity. Whatever you can say about Hitler, at the beginning, that was a social sort of thing. Yeah. Before.
Yeah, Nazi stands for National Socialism. The socialism part is what got him the votes.
Yeah, and then came the Röhmputsch, and then basically the socialists were thrown off the party, and then capital instrumentalized the National Socialists, yeah, if you want so, yeah. So by any standards, I think that as historians and as political scientists, comparison is a scientific tool, yeah. So I defend comparisons as scientific tool. And not as means of relativization, yeah, which is also a problem, an intellectual problem, that we say that now the comparison is relativization, yeah. But that, leaving this aside, my point was that if we reason about where we are and did we hit the iceberg or not, I would say banking crisis was it, yeah. And banking crisis turned the left into the right populism. On the right side, populism upraisal, the right-wing revolution is not allowed, because the right-wing revolution always has a smell. It comes with racism, it comes with misogyny, it comes with, women's whatever abortion rights, it's a non-progressive sort of people's revolution, yeah?
It's how it is being portrayed, yes.
Yeah. And that is why it's not accepted on social sort of standards, whereas the left always is this progressive, fighting for liberty sort of thing, revolution, yeah? So I would argue we hit the iceberg, but we didn't tell that everything we're experiencing in Europe since, say, 10, 15 years, that the starting point was the banking crisis, for me, at least, yeah? Remember, we had Stefan Essel, Empört euch, we had all these demonstrations, the 99 against the 1%. And I mean, there was a lot of social protest by then, still possible. But then in the years later, they basically captured social protest. Gilets jaunes, was also framed populist. The social progress in Europe,
Yellow Vests,
basically ended in 2013 with the banking crisis. And everything that came after, even the Gilets jaunes in France, which was
the Yellow Vests, right?
Yellow Vest, in the first place was framed right-wing. It started by then, yeah? No more social protest. Every protest is basically right-wing protest. That was the framing, yeah? So I think we should prepare for the rescue boats, if you want. And if I may say this, but I'm among those who organized the Trans-European Peace Project, because that's also a problem. Peace is now right-wing, yeah?
Mhm.
Liberty is, freedom is now right-wing. I totally observed, which is that the core values of the left, like liberty, freedom, and peace, have been captured and tagged right-wing. But we organized www.europeanpeaceproject.eu. And we organized a huge sort of manifesto on the 9th of May, because that's the European Day. And we did a statement, a manifesto that you can find there in something like 25 languages, that basically states that the European citizens are not happy, are really in resentment against the EU, against the war laundering, and that we European citizens stand against that EU policy. So we make a clear cleavage between we, the citizens of Europe, we want peace with Russia, not against, and we think that our own institutions, the EU and our national governments, are driving us into a historical momentum of war that we citizens, we do not want, yeah? And we will do a similar proclamation on the 9th of October, on the 7th of October, remembering Gaza and everything that happened, because there also we feel like with war, I mean, weapons delivery, and so the European citizens are against. You see increasingly a protest in Europe against Gaza. Yeah, we had the British, I think it was the foreign minister, we have Mr. de Villepin of France, Varoufakis speaking out. I mean, there is now also a huge peace conference in Rotterdam on the 25th of June, a huge European gathering. So there is something like an upraisal, that's what I wanted to say, an upraisal of European citizens, cross-national uprising against our own institutions that drive us into policies we do not want to see, yeah? So that is what I would call preparing the rescue boats, that you build the alternative that should be, I mean, it's emergent, it's very sort of small, obviously it's small, yeah, but everything started with small social movement. I would argue that all the policies that I would have, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have said, okay, let's reform the EU. We need to democratize it. We need to work on the EU. We need to make it better. This is all gone. There's nothing to reform in the EU. There's no chance, any decent chance of any institutional sort of fixing the EU. But sort of the thinking about alternative European structures, how could they be? Which Europe we want in the world? Which European security architecture? There is space. There are many critical mass people. There's a lot of, thinking and writing. And I hope something can emerge out of this.
Yeah, but it needs to be made anew. The current structures that we have are too calcified already.
Yeah.
And already run down. Already hit the iceberg, so they're already going down. I just hope they do so without taking all of us with them. Ulrike, people who want to read more from you, I mean, you published a lot. People can find your books online. Where else should they go to find you? Because you have your own YouTube channel in German language, right?
Yeah, I do. I have a YouTube channel in German language. I have a website, which is www.ulrike-guérot.de. I have something like 16 books out, as many of them actually are translated. So I hope to have an English translation and perhaps a Turkish and a Spanish. So people have been signaling me that's apparently a very interesting book. So I hope to have translations. But perhaps ending on that note, the third chapter of my book is really a discourse offer to the global community. First, please notice there are critical voices in Europe who go against this EU policy. Yeah, that is very important to not say the Europeans are the EU. There is critical mass. And these critical mass people, I mean, what I end up with my book is I take the oldest map of Europe. Perhaps I can still say this. Yeah, I take the oldest map of Europe, which is from 1534. And I do an interpretation about this oldest sort of imago of Europe. And I say three things. This Madame Europe, which is she's a princess, yeah? I mean, Europe is shown as a woman and as a princess. She stands on Russian soil. So she stands on Russian soil. So I just argue with the map, saying, look at this map. There is a woman standing on Russian soil. Is it reasonable 500 years later to draw a hardcore NATO border in the midst of Europe? It can't be the sort of the spiritual dimension of what Mrs. Europe is. Yeah. The second is, if you look at that map, Spain is the head. And the Spanish sort of head of that woman looks into the Arabic world. So there is a mirroring between Occident and Orient. So the second point I say is Europe needs to look to the Orient, because it was always Orient, Occident, and Europe could not exist in cultural civilizatory terms if we didn't have that mirror that the Orient, the Arab people are, right? And I say, if Europe wants to look Washington, she really had a
Twist her neck.
yeah, with her neck, yeah. So, and the third thing, on the map, Europe holds what we call the Reichsapfel. So there is an apple, which is the golden apple in her left arm, and that's the apple of Caesaropapismus, the apple of Res Publica, and the sort of sovereign power, which is about the republic. And the republic, if you translate republic into English, yeah, the first time it was translated in the Putney Papers in 1647, it was translated with Commonwealth. Now, everybody understands Commonwealth is a British Empire. No, Commonwealth is the translation that we create a commonwealth. We citizens create a commonwealth if we are the citizens of a republic. So in a way, if you go down theory, and I do not want to do this here, but the republic is a different economic order than capitalism. So in a way, I say, if Europe wants to find itself back in a civilizatory and cultural way, which would be the only sort of self-anchoring in which Europe could pretend to have a role in the future multipolar world, it would need to do three things: find the republic, go anti-capitalist in a way, yeah, I mean, republic, common good sort of economic policies, look at the Arabic world, and stand on Russian soil. That's the three things Europe should discuss. And I wrote this chapter as an offer to all these people listening here in the Arabic countries, in the Russian, hemisphere, to say, look, can we have a discussion about you looking at Europe? And can you tell me that if we Europeans were to change Europe in that direction, would you then reach out a hand to work with us?
Yeah. And just to make it clear, when Ulrike says stand on Russian soil, she doesn't mean to invade Russia. She means to anchor itself with Russia as a common thing, as a common good, right? Just so we don't get a misunderstanding.
No, everybody can. I perhaps hold this map into the camera to not have a problem here. Let me just find it. Sorry for this, but obviously. Where's the third chapter? Where do I find my map now? Sorry for this. But it's important. It's just that on this map, Europe stands. I mean, her feet are standing on Russian
I mean, she's grounded. Europe is grounded in
grounded,
Russia.
yeah.
Without Russia, she wouldn't be standing. Or Europe cannot stand without Russia. That's that's the meaning.
That's the thing. Let me just here it is. I finally found it. So so it's pretty telling, yeah. I mean, the feet are on Russian soil. There's the Reichsapfel, which is holding to the Arab, which is this sort of sovereign, is the republic. And then again, she looks into the Arabic world. Yeah.
Right.
I think if we do interpretation of this map, and I'm really thinking this map gets 500 years in 2034. So that leaves 10 years of discussion about re-anchoring Europe, about what she is. I say what she is, yeah.
And that vision of Europe is, of course, a continental Europe. It's not a transatlantic Europe. It's a continental.
Yeah, it's a transcontinental or Eurasian Europe, yeah. And interestingly enough, I had a couple of talks with Americans, basically arguing that there is a distinct European culture from the American culture. We are not Starbucks, yeah. We are Segafredo Cafe. We are not Hollywood. We are Pasolini and Chabrol, to try, because the West is not a cultural concept. The West is perhaps a NATO security concept, but the West is not a cultural concept. Yeah. And it was very interesting. I did this in 2 YouTube things with the Americans, and I had a very good resonance, with the Americans. And what I would like to see, because then I went to a Turkish blogger, and I could really see that the Turks, which are also between the Arab world and the Eurasian European world, yeah, who have a belonging to Europe, as the Russians have a cultural belonging to Russia, yeah, that the offer to say, if Europe could turn its look into southeast, into Russia and East Russia and the south, which is the Arabic world, yeah, I think it could go into resonance with with itself. And the Turkish man was very happy about this, and that is what I understand as a discourse offer for sort of the new Europe I would like to see in 2034.
If Europe just stops twisting its own neck across the Atlantic, I mean, she could go back to where she belongs. But okay, Ulrike, we will keep the discussion going. Thank you very much for your insights today, and see you soon again.
Yeah, see you soon, Pascal. Many thanks for having me.